When Karoline Leavitt faced a moment of public humiliation, she didn't flinch. She stood tall, demanded answers, and reminded everyone watching what true dignity looks like. The city was just beginning to unwind from its morning rush when Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the rooftop of Skyline Terrace, the sun glinting off the glass towers of downtown Boston. Perched atop a boutique hotel, the café was an oasis in the heart of chaos, a place where noise softened into ambient jazz and time slowed to the rhythm of soft-spoken baristas and clinking cups. Karoline moved with a graceful efficiency, her tailored navy coat catching the breeze as she made her way to her preferred table in the far corner, a spot partially shaded by a rustling canopy of vines and just distant enough from the rest of the café to let her think. The skyline stretched before her in a familiar pattern of rooftops, cranes, and commuter trails, a visual metaphor for the world she navigated daily. Strategy, progress, chaos, and calm. Karoline had carved a career out of helping others craft their message, control their narrative, and command a room with clarity. But here, she didn't have to be on. There were no cameras, no journalists, just her thoughts, and the city humming below. She set her leather bag down beside her and pulled out her tablet, checking her calendar out of habit. 3 client calls, 2 press conferences, and a late-night flight to D.C. Her day, as always, was structured down to the minute, but the hour she spent here every Thursday morning was sacred. It grounded her. No matter how wild the week had been, this rooftop ritual reminded her of who she was beneath the headlines, and headlines she helped shape. The regular staff had come to know her quiet rhythms. Marcus, the barista, always smiled and handed her the house special without asking. Lena, the manager, sometimes stopped by to chat about the latest city gossip or ask about her thoughts on the latest media firestorm. There was a mutual respect here, unspoken but steady, and Karoline appreciated it more than she let on. As she sat, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, taking in the scent of freshly brewed coffee and blooming jasmine from the rooftop garden. It was in moments like these that she often did her clearest thinking. Not in boardrooms or back-to-back meetings, but here, where the sky was visible and the noise of ambition momentarily faded. Today felt no different. She had just wrapped up a complex morning strategy session, and her mind was still buzzing with angles, risks, and messaging traps. But now, all of that could wait. For the next hour, she was just Karoline, a woman at peace in her favorite spot. Little did she know that peace was about to be tested in a way she had never expected. Not by politics nor media spin, but by something far more personal. And it would all begin with a simple sentence from a stranger. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karoline was halfway through her second sip of coffee when she noticed a man she didn't recognize scanning the cafe from near the host stand. He stood out, not in a flashy way, but with the deliberate stillness of someone not entirely at ease in his surroundings. Tall, mid-40s, clean-shaven, and dressed in a dark charcoal blazer with no name tag, he didn't carry the relaxed energy of the usual staff. He wasn't serving, clearing, or managing logistics, he was observing. Karoline's instincts, honed from years of media and crisis strategy, immediately filed him under problem pending. Still, she gave him only a brief glance before returning to her tablet. Maybe he was new, maybe a vendor or hotel executive. Whatever his role, it had nothing to do with her. Until it did. She had just opened a campaign briefing email when the man approached her table, his shadow falling across the tablet's screen. She looked up. He didn't smile. His posture was stiff, almost rehearsed, like someone carrying out an instruction they didn't quite agree with but felt obligated to enforce. "Ms. Leavitt?" he asked, voice firm but not impolite. She nodded. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karoline blinked once. Her hand paused mid-motion as she set down her coffee. She looked at him directly, calm but puzzled. "Excuse me?" she said, eyebrows lifting ever so slightly. The man's expression didn't waver. "I'm afraid I have to ask you to leave the premises." A chill of tension began to settle over the table, though the air around them remained sunny and mild. Karoline didn't raise her voice. "Is there a reason?" she asked evenly. He hesitated, not long but long enough for her to notice. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that," he said finally. "But I need you to gather your things and go." She leaned back slightly in her chair, studying him. The café around them continued in quiet rhythm, silverware against porcelain, murmured conversation, the gentle clatter of cups. But she could feel a subtle shift in energy. A nearby couple had gone silent. A waiter had paused mid-pour. She was being watched. Karoline had been in countless high-pressure situations, live debates, breaking newsrooms, hostile interviews. But this was different. This was personal. She wasn't causing a scene, she wasn't even talking. And yet, here she was being asked to leave her favorite place without so much as a justification. The man's stance suggested he was ready for pushback, maybe even hoping for it, ready to frame her as difficult, non-compliant. But Karoline wasn't going to make it that easy. She gave him the smallest, most strategic smile and replied, "Then, I'm afraid I can't go anywhere until I understand why I'm being asked." And just like that, the temperature around the terrace dropped. Not literally, but in mood. A storm hadn't hit, but the clouds had started to gather. Something was very wrong, and Karoline knew this wasn't just about coffee. The silence between them hung heavy, broken only by the ambient soundtrack of cafe life that now felt oddly distant, like background noise in a scene gone off script. Karoline remained seated, her spine straight, her expression unreadable but alert. She wasn't going to raise her voice, that wasn't her style, but her refusal to move without explanation had shifted something in the atmosphere. Conversations at nearby tables began to taper off. Patrons glanced sideways over the rims of their glasses, some subtly craning their necks, others pretending not to listen as they leaned in just a little closer. The previously soothing hum of the rooftop cafe was now thick with tension and curiosity. The man, still unnamed, still unreadable, didn't step back. He stood there, stiff and square, like a security detail or someone trying to act the part. Karoline glanced beyond him toward the bar, where she saw Lena Tran, the cafe manager, standing with a to-go cup in her hand, frozen mid-mation. Their eyes met. Lena looked away. That was unusual. Lena, who usually offered a warm nod or a quick wave anytime Karoline came in, now seemed unsure whether to approach or disappear. Karoline turned back to the man. "If I'm disturbing someone, I'd like to know how," she said clearly but without sharpness. "I'm a paying customer, sitting quietly at my regular table, drinking coffee. If someone has made a complaint, I deserve to know what it's about." He shifted slightly, glancing at Lena, as though waiting for a lifeline. That didn't come. "We've had a concern raised about your presence here," he finally said, and though the words were formal, they were hollow. He didn't believe them either. "A concern," Karoline repeated, more to test the word than to question it. She looked around, taking in the peaceful scene. The couple sharing a pastry, the woman in business attire typing on her laptop, the elderly man reading a newspaper 2 tables down. No one looked disturbed. In fact, the only disruption was the one currently unfolding at her table. "Is someone uncomfortable with me being here?" she asked, turning back to the man. "Have I done something inappropriate? Offended someone?" He didn't answer, and that silence was louder than any explanation. The mood of the cafe had subtly changed. Patrons weren't sure whether to keep watching or politely look away. Staff moved with exaggerated casualness, sneaking glances as they cleared dishes or refilled glasses. It wasn't just discomfort anymore, it was suspense. Karoline could feel it building, like a ripple moving outward from the center of a stone-dropped pond. She felt it too, frustration trying to edge its way up through her ribs, but she pressed it down. This wasn't the time to escalate, not yet. Instead, she drew in a breath and let her voice settle into something steadier. "This feels like a mistake," she said quietly, "and I think someone should clarify it before it turns into something it doesn't have to be." The man didn't move. Lena didn't speak, and the weight of the silence pressed harder. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Karoline remained seated, her composure unshaken, even as the atmosphere around her thickened with invisible pressure. She knew what this looked like to everyone else, a professional woman, alone at a table, facing down a man who had no authority she recognized. And she also knew that the power of silence, when used correctly, could speak louder than outrage, so she let it hang for a few beats longer, then carefully reached for her coffee and took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving the man standing before her. "You still haven't told me what I've done," she said calmly, the edge of her voice cool, deliberate. "If you're going to publicly ask someone to leave, I assume there's a reason." He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes darted again toward Lena, who still hadn't moved from behind the counter. The tension between them was almost palpable now, as if neither wanted to be the one to fully commit to this half-explained removal. A few more patrons had stopped pretending to mind their own business. A woman across the terrace put her phone down and began watching openly. Someone else shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Karoline could feel the room slowly aligning, not necessarily with her, but against the discomfort of ambiguity. Finally, the man exhaled and replied, "Some customers have expressed concerns. That's all I'm allowed to say." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Concerns?" She let the word echo briefly before continuing. "That's vague enough to mean anything and nothing. Is this about something I said? Something I wore? My presence?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because unless I've violated a policy, I fail to see how concerns justify asking me to leave my regular table." Again, no answer. He looked increasingly uneasy now, the kind of unease that comes when authority begins to lose its footing. Karoline leaned forward slightly, her tone never rising. "Let me make something very clear. I've been coming to this cafe for years. I've never once raised my voice, disrespected a server, or disrupted anyone. I've brought clients here, I've recommended this place to colleagues, I've even complimented the staff on how well they handle busy mornings. And now, without any specifics, I'm being told I need to leave because of an undefined concern?" She didn't need to shout. Her voice carried the weight of restraint, of measured conviction, and that made it all the more powerful. The man shifted his stance, clearly floundering. His initial confidence, if it had even been real, was beginning to crumble. From behind the bar, Lena finally moved. She walked over slowly, shoulders slightly hunched, the look on her face one of someone reluctantly stepping into a mess she hadn't created but now had to manage. "Karoline," she said gently, "maybe we can talk about this in private." Karoline didn't budge. "No, this started in public, and I've done nothing wrong. If there's an explanation, it can be given right here." Lena's expression tightened. Around them, the cafe felt like it had gone still. The low jazz continued, but the murmur of conversation had all but vanished. Karoline's refusal to fold had shifted the mood entirely. She wasn't just defending herself now, she was holding a mirror up to the room, to the staff, to the strange, quiet complicity that allowed this kind of thing to happen without anyone asking questions. "You're making this very difficult," the man murmured. "No," Karoline said, her voice like iron beneath velvet. "What's difficult is being publicly humiliated, with no reason. What's difficult is being treated like a problem, when I've done nothing but exist in the wrong way, in the wrong place. So either you tell me what I've supposedly done, or I stay right here. That's not a threat, it's a decision." And with that, the burden shifted again, not onto Karoline, but onto them. The weight of explanation was no longer hers to demand, it was theirs to provide, or fail to. Karoline could feel the heat rising, not from anger but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. She'd been calm, composed, even generous in giving them chances to explain, but with every vague deflection and tense glance between Lena and the man it became clear, no one here was going to take responsibility, not unless she forced the issue. She reached into her bag with slow precision and pulled out her phone, placing it on the table like a chess move. "Since neither of you seem able or willing to tell me the truth," she said, "I think it's time I speak with someone who can." The man stiffened. Lena opened her mouth as if to protest but said nothing. Karoline scrolled through her contacts and tapped the name without hesitation. Miles Carter, owner of the café, hotel magnate, a man she'd met several times at events, even consulted for during a brief PR campaign a year back. She knew he prided himself on customer loyalty, on atmosphere, on reputation. And right now, that reputation was teetering on a rooftop ledge. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Karoline!" Miles's voice was warm, familiar, caught off guard in a pleasant way. "It's been a while. Everything okay?" Karoline's eyes never left the man and manager standing in front of her. "Not exactly," she said, voice level. "I'm sitting at Skyline Terrace, your rooftop café, where I've been a loyal customer for years, and I've just been asked to leave, publicly, without any explanation. I was told there was a concern about me, but no one here will clarify what that means." A pause. She could almost hear the mood on his end shift. "What?" he asked, the warmth now replaced by confusion. "Who asked you to leave? What the hell is going on?" Karoline quickly laid out the sequence of events: the stranger's approach, Lena's silence, the refusal to give any specific reason. She kept her tone measured, but her words were sharp, clean, undeniable. She didn't embellish, she didn't need to. Miles let out a breath. "Karoline, I had no idea any of this was happening. That's not how we operate. At all. If there was a complaint, it should have been addressed discreetly and with clarity, not whatever this is. Give me a minute, I'm going to call Lena right now." Karoline nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I appreciate that, but understand. This isn't just about me being asked to leave. It's about how quickly people in power will abandon fairness for the sake of avoiding discomfort." There was another pause, then a quiet, serious reply. "You're absolutely right. I'll make this right. Now." As the call ended, Karoline looked up to find Lena checking her phone, her face blanching slightly. The man beside her stepped back for the first time. Something had shifted. The authority in the room was no longer his to claim, it had just been reclaimed, calmly, clearly, and without compromise, by the woman he had tried to quietly erase. Lena's phone buzzed just seconds after Karoline ended her call with Miles. She hesitated, glanced at the screen, and visibly swallowed before answering. Her voice dropped low, her words clipped and cautious as she stepped aside. The man, Damon, as Karoline finally recalled from an old staff update, hovered awkwardly near the table now, no longer the enforcer he had tried to be. His authority had been stripped the moment Miles got involved, and he knew it. Karoline, however, didn't gloat. She simply sat back in her chair and waited. The truth was coming, and it no longer needed to be chased. It was about to reveal itself. A few minutes later, Lena returned, her expression changed. The nerves were still there, but now layered with a tinge of embarrassment, maybe even regret. She stood at Karoline's table, shoulders squared but voice softer. "Miles asked me to apologize to you directly," she began. "He wasn't aware of what was going on, and he's not happy with how this was handled." Karoline nodded once. "Go on," she said, tone measured. Lena exchanged a brief glance with Damon before continuing. "There was a misunderstanding," she said carefully. "A few days ago, one of our guests complained that they overheard a conversation you had with someone at another table. They thought you were speaking critically about them. We couldn't confirm it, but the owner of the hotel's event space forwarded the complaint to us, and we were asked to be cautious." Karoline frowned, her mind tracing back. She had spoken to a colleague earlier that week about a local press event. A candid conversation, perhaps a little blunt, but certainly not targeted at anyone in the cafe. "So, you didn't verify it?" she asked. "No follow-up, no context, just an anonymous complaint, and I get publicly asked to leave?" Lena sighed. "It shouldn't have escalated. You're right, we overreacted, and I take responsibility for that. I should have handled it differently." She looked down briefly. "It wasn't meant to be personal." "But it became personal," Karoline replied quietly. "Because when no one steps up to clarify, silence becomes complicity. You know me, Lena. You've seen me here for years." "I do," Lena said, her voice tinged with something real now, regret, maybe even shame. "And I'm sorry for forgetting that in the moment." Karoline turned to Damon. He looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. "And you?" she asked. He shifted. I was just told to deliver the message," he mumbled. "But I admit, I didn't ask questions, I just did what I was told." Karoline exhaled slowly, disappointment settling in. "That's part of the problem," she said, "doing what you're told without asking why." The apology was on the table, but so was the larger truth. The incident hadn't been about rules or disruption, it had been about assumptions, silence, and how quickly dignity could be dismissed when no one had the courage to ask questions. And Karoline wasn't about to let that go unanswered. The mood at Skyline Terrace had shifted once more, but this time it was quieter, more humbled. Lena stood with her hands folded, Damon a step behind her, as Karoline calmly regarded them both. The tension that had gripped the space earlier had thinned, replaced by something heavier, awareness. An unspoken understanding settled into the air, that a line had been crossed, and no one could pretend otherwise. "Thank you for the apology," Karoline said finally, her tone still controlled but edged with firm resolve. "But I need you both to understand this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. I was asked to leave a place where I've always been treated with respect, based on a vague complaint no one could explain, and not one person thought to ask me about it first." Lena nodded slowly. "You're right, and we failed you. I did. I was afraid of making the wrong call, and in doing so I made a worse one. I promise you, it won't happen again." Her voice was steadier now, no longer rehearsed. She wasn't just managing a problem, she was owning it. Karoline studied her, looking for sincerity, and finding it. Still, sincerity without follow-through was just a bandage on a broken system. "I hope not," she replied, "because if this could happen to someone like me, someone calm, composed, and familiar, what happens when it's someone who doesn't have a voice? Someone who won't push back?" Damon shifted uncomfortably, hands now in his pockets. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that," he said. "It was never about trying to humiliate you." "But intent doesn't erase impact," Karoline said, turning to him. "And next time you're asked to enforce something, ask for details. Ask for reasons. You don't need to be a bulldog for ambiguity." He gave a small nod, eyes cast downward. "Understood." Lena exhaled. "We'll be reviewing how we handle complaints from now on," Miles insisted. "And I want you to know, you're still welcome here, Karoline. Always." For the first time since the incident began, Karoline's posture softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentler now. "That matters." She gathered her tablet and coat, not in defeat but with a quiet sense of closure. Patrons who had watched the confrontation unfold were now silently returning to their lattes and laptops, though more than one offered her a subtle nod of acknowledgement as she passed. Not pity, respect. She had stood her ground with grace, and people had noticed. As she neared the door, Lena called after her softly, "We really are sorry." Karoline paused, glanced back with a small, measured smile. "Just don't be sorry next time. Be better." And with that she stepped back into the sunlight, leaving behind not just the rooftop café, but the shadow of a moment that could have silenced her, and choosing instead to walk forward, heard, respected, and unchanged at her core. As Karoline stepped onto the street, the buzz of the city welcomed her like a reset button. The cool breeze brushed past her face, carrying with it the faint hum of car horns and distant conversation. The confrontation was behind her now, but the emotional weight lingered, not as anger, but as reflection. She hadn't expected her morning ritual to become a public test of principle, yet as she replayed each moment in her mind, she realized the experience had revealed something far more important than the discomfort it caused. This hadn't been about a table or a cafe, it had been about dignity, about how quickly it could be stripped away when people chose silence over fairness, vague protocol over personal accountability. She could have walked out quietly, she could have accepted the non-answer, avoided confrontation, and chalked it up to a bad day. But then what? What message would that send? To herself, to others watching, to the next person dismissed without explanation? Karoline knew better than anyone that words mattered, but so did standing firm when they weren't given to you. Her calm defiance hadn't just reclaimed her own voice, it had created a space where others, staff, patrons, maybe even Lena, might think twice the next time they saw something unjust. In her work, Karoline spent countless hours helping others control their public narrative, but today she'd taken back her own, not by shouting, but by asking the right questions and refusing to disappear. That, she realized, was the deeper takeaway. Sometimes the most powerful way to lead isn't by making a scene. It's by standing your ground, staying composed, and reminding the world, quietly but firmly, that respect is not something to be requested, it's something to be expected. As Karoline walked toward her car, she glanced once more at the rooftop above. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary, now transformed by a moment she hadn't seen coming. But she didn't carry bitterness with her. What she carried was clarity. The real lesson wasn't in the confrontation itself, but in how it was handled. She hadn't needed to raise her voice, threaten, or storm out. She had stood her ground with composure, demanded the truth, and reminded everyone watching that silence doesn't protect fairness. It protects the systems that ignore it. Respect isn't earned by how loud you speak, but by how firmly you hold your line when it matters most. Karoline had left the café with more than an apology. She left with her integrity intact and a deeper understanding of how one quiet refusal to be dismissed could ripple outward. She knew others in that room had been changed by what they saw, and that, she realized, was enough. Sometimes the most important victories don't come from winning a fight. They come from refusing to walk away from one that matters. And Karoline Leavitt would never walk away quietly. Not when the principle was louder than the moment. The story of Karoline Leavitt teaches a powerful lesson about self-respect, clarity, and the quiet strength of standing your ground. In a world where people are often quick to avoid discomfort, choosing silence over accountability, Karoline reminds us that dignity should never be negotiable. She wasn't confrontational, but she was unwavering. She didn't allow vague excuses or power plays to define her worth. Instead, she calmly insisted on transparency and fairness, showing that true strength doesn't require volume, it requires conviction. The lesson here is clear: when something feels wrong, speak up, not with aggression, but with composure. When others stay silent, let your voice remind them of what's right, and above all, remember that respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you affirm through your presence, your words, and your refusal to be dismissed. Karoline's experience shows us that even in the face of public discomfort or institutional silence, one person's calm defiance can shift the narrative and make others think twice before they allow injustice to go unchallenged again. It's not about creating conflict. It's about creating clarity. And sometimes the most lasting change begins when one person simply says, "I deserve better."